What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 98 of the Book Binge. And before we get into anything, I will warn you for this video that my niece happens to be around the house, and as of the last couple months, she's gotten to be very talkative. And by very talkative, I don't mean that she just likes to talk a lot. I mean, she talks actually very loudly compared to how she used to. So if her voice kind of bleeds in the background of the mic while I'm talking every once in a while, I apologize for that. With that being said, let's just kind of get right into what the topic of this video is, that being reading slumps. We all have them, for better or for worse, no matter how much we wish we didn't. We all kind of seem to have slumps. Just being a reader, that is kind of how things go. That is life. Being a reader is going into slumps occasionally, or more frequently if you happen to be somebody else. But for the purpose of this video, let's kind of talk about what is a reading slump. I think we all know what this is, but I think a reading slump can be defined one of two ways. Firstly, a reading slump can be when you just aren't enjoying reading no matter what it is you're reading, so you're just kind of not in that mood no matter what, no matter when you try or what it is you try to read. I think that is generally going to be accepted as being what a reading slump is. If you aren't enjoying reading regardless of the scenario, that's a reading slump, right? But I also think that there is a second kind of definition that can go along with this as well. I think a reading slump can also be when you're just straight up bored with reading or not excited by the idea of reading. It's not necessarily just that you aren't enjoying it. It's when you can't find yourself wanting to do it. So there's kind of the two different aspects of it. I would say the first example that I just outlined of a reading slump is when you want to read, or when you want to be able to read, or when you want to enjoy reading, but you pick up a book, you open it to the pages, and you read the words, and just nothing's happening for you. That can be a reading slump, like I said. Or the second option is more if you look at a book, you open the pages, and you just don't even want to read. If you were to start reading, you kind of get back into it, you get more further into the groove, but it's actually getting yourself to actually do it that's the hard part. I would say for me, it is generally the second type of slump that I tend to experience, and I tend to experience them more often. And speaking of when people tend to experience them, I find this to be the most interesting part, just when people are affected by slumps. I know some people have reading slumps very infrequently, quite rarely even. Sometimes it'll be years in between certain people experiencing any form of slump at all, whether it be small or large. It takes years, but then when they go into a slump, it can last for several months or even longer. I know for myself, through the end of high school, there was several years where I basically did not read, mostly at all. There would be maybe a period of a week or two where I read a few books, but otherwise I just did not read for a few years. And for some people, that could be considered a slump. And I would have considered that a slump myself as well in some of my earliest videos on the channel, or some of my earliest booktube videos on the channel. That is what I considered that period of my life to be. But others, like myself, at least myself in this point in time in my life, have reading slumps a little bit more frequently. I myself can have 2 or 3 or more a year. Through the back half of 2022, I want to say I had like 2 or 3 minor slumps in the space of like 4 months. It was not good, but my types of slumps, at least, they only last a couple weeks. Like, I may have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 slumps in a year, but if they only last for maybe 2 or 3 weeks each, it isn't much different than, say, only having 1 slump in a year that lasts a couple months, right? Or on the alternative, I kind of think it works better for, just kind of the way I like to enjoy my life. But let's talk about what I do when it comes to reading slumps in general without doing any more of this preamble. I think a lot of my strategy when it comes to handling reading slumps in my life, a lot of it comes down to prevention rather than, anything else. It comes down to sometimes just switching things up. Recently, I would say in March of 2023, I felt a slump coming on as I was finishing The Count of Monte Cristo. I was starting to feel a little bit burnt out by the book. I was reading a lot of it, even though I was enjoying the book was very good. Reading, 50 pages or more of that book every single day and still feeling like you were barely making a dent in it, or like I was barely making a dent in it, doesn't necessarily feel great, even if you're enjoying the book. It can be like, well, I'm just not making any progress. Even if I know that I am, if it doesn't feel like I am, that can kind of burn me out, even if the book itself is not burning me out. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of what was happening. So for April of 2023, I kind of switched it up. I did something a little bit different. I switched to nostalgic reads. I switched to quick reads. I switched to easy reads. I switched to books that would make me excited to read again, that would make me enjoy reading in a way that was completely opposite of the Count of Monte Cristo, rather than large books that would take me forever to read that I wouldn't make any progress in. I read books that I could get done quickly or that I would really enjoy in a different way. So I read 127 Hours by Aaron Ralston and The Card Turner by Louis Satcher. These books are books that I've loved a lot for all my life since I first read them. They're nostalgic reads, especially for the month of April. It's kind of my nostalgia reading month. If you're more interested in that topic, I did do a video on that a few months back if you want to check that out. But both of those books went by really quick and really easily for me, and it felt nice to be able to read them at a time when I felt like reading wasn't quite as exciting for me to do. I also switched to reading a couple series as well. The Underland Chronicles by Suzanne Collins and The Heroes of Olympus by Rick Riordan. The first being a middle grade sort of series, somewhat middle grade / YA series, and then Heroes of Olympus being just a straight up YA series. Books that aren't horribly long. Heroes of Olympus books are a little bit longer, but they're still really quick and easy reads. Underland Chronicles books being middle grade, they're super, super short, super quick, really easy to read. You can read them in one day, easy. Even I can read a lot of those books in one day if I wanted to. The point is, I switched to a bunch of these books that I could get through quickly, that I would enjoy for different reasons, and most importantly, all of these books were rereads. I also read The Way of a Dan by Philip Chase in April, but that was kind of an outlier as well. That book was really good, but most of what I read in April were books that I had already read before, that I knew were quick, that I knew were easy, and that I knew I already loved. This switch up massively helped me because by the time I got to May, I was starting to read a lot of other stuff. At one point in May, I was getting to the point that I was reading 5 books at a time, which was quite insane, but I was just enjoying myself. I was reading for a different reason. I wasn't just trying to plow through one gigantic book. I was doing things a little bit differently. Needless to say, the switch up that I put myself through in terms of my reading life in April really helped me. It was perfect for what I needed it to be. It helped prevent the reading slump, and like I said, it worked really well. Although, to be clear, some of the other time when I can feel a slump coming on, sometimes I don't try to bother too much with the switch up if I don't feel like I can handle it. If I know that a reading slump is coming, it is going to happen, generally what I'll do is I'll just kind of stop reading for a few days. So instead of letting myself go into a slump where I find myself unable to read for a couple weeks or even a month or something like that, I find myself just avoiding books altogether. I'll maybe read for an hour or two in the morning a couple days, if at all, and I'll kind of not read at all for the rest of the day. I won't do any reading at work. I won't do any of that stuff. I'll barely read in the morning, like I said. I'll either slow down or completely cut out the reading for a few days. And generally, at the end of a few days, and I start reading a book again, it's as if the slump was never coming on in the first place. That tends to work for me as well. If the above method doesn't work, however, if neither of those two work, if switching it up doesn't prevent the slump, if not reading as much for a couple days doesn't prevent the reading slump, then I kind of move on to the next stage of handling my slumps, which is basically acceptance. I just kind of resigned myself to not reading for a while. If I get to a point where it's okay, well, I'm just not enjoying reading, I don't try to fight it. I don't force myself to read because that's only going to make it worse. Instead, what I tend to do is I take a break for a couple weeks. If by the end of those couple weeks I'm definitely feeling a drive to read again, I'll start reading again. But sometimes if it takes a little bit longer than that, say maybe 3 weeks or a month, that's fine as well. What happens is most of my time spent in this reading slump goes towards gaming, for example, because I really enjoy reading, I really enjoy gaming. It's hard to find time to do both of those regularly. So what I tend to do is if I'm in a reading slump, the time that would be spent reading goes to gaming. And when I'm not in a reading slump and I'm reading a lot, I'll maybe fit in some gaming here and there if I feel like I can and if I feel like I want to. Otherwise, reading slumps is when I tend to get all of my gaming done, which, like I said, kind of helps. If I go into multiple slumps a year that only last a couple weeks, I can plow through a game or two in those couple weeks, and then I get my gaming dose in every quarter or something like that. It's pretty nice, actually, in a weird way. After this, basically just comes the recovery period, you know? Usually, I'll just binge a game or two, depending on how long they are during that reading slump, as I was saying. And once I kind of start winding down on those, I generally start to feel the mood to start reading again, sort of coming back. What I'll do is I'll slowly start to incorporate reading back into my mornings again. Instead of waking up and immediately going to play a game, I'll wake up and I'll read for an hour or two. And then I'll go to do some of the gaming and kind of go through that kind of process where I'm slowly decreasing the gaming that I'm doing, slowly increasing the reading that I'm doing in the morning, and then eventually when I feel like I'm back to normal, I'll start to incorporate reading at other points in the day as well, like say at work. Once I have gotten back to reading about 2 hours each morning with a little bit of supplemental reading throughout the rest of the day, I'm pretty much back to normal. And that's always a great feeling. So that is how I handle my reading slumps. If you have a different manner of handling them, or if you kind of have a different feeling when you can tell when a reading slump is going to be happening soon for you, let me know in the comments below. I'm kind of interested in. I feel like this is an interesting topic because, like I said, I know some people who don't go into slumps often, but when they do, they last forever. If you're one of those people, how do you kind of get through that? How do you go through several months without being able to read? That seems like it would be very difficult for me. But then again, I also run a booktube channel where that just would not work at all. Like going into a slump where I just couldn't read for a few months would be really, really bad for me. But if you're also like me and you kind of go into slumps frequently, tell me what you do that might be a little bit different from the way that I handle my slumps. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching this video. I had a fun time with this one. I'll be back on Tuesday with that special fun time video about my channel name, and also that review for Robinson Crusoe. I'll see you guys next week.